Good evening, everybody. Good evening, members and officers and members of the public watching this on live stream. This is a meeting of the Craven Spatial Planning Subcommittee. I am the Deputy Chair and the Chairman, currently absent, but I have no doubt he will join us. Apologies for absence.
Councillor Sutcliffe has given his apologies. Thank you.
Public participation?
We haven't got any notifications. No, thank you.
Declarations of interest, anybody? Looking round, no. That's great. So moving on to the body of the meeting, item 4 on the agenda, monitoring discussion papers, numbers 2 to 4. Who's taking this one? David, are you?
No, it's
Is it you, Ruth?
me, Councillor Myers, yeah. Well, it's a joint effort tonight. I'm going to sort of briefly introduce the report, and then I'm going to hand over to Dave, Rachel, Roy and Laura from the spatial planning team, who are going to go through a short presentation, which will hopefully assist in then the discussion that will come afterwards. So the purpose of the report is to present 3 monitoring discussion papers to Craven Spatial tonight. So one relates to travel and transportation, the second relates to land and nature, and the third relates to carbon neutral energy and low carbon waste. And these are 3 themes from the Council's Climate Emergency Strategic Plan. And we wanted to present these 3 papers all together to one meeting, as they are closely linked and allows these linkages to be discussed as part of the discussion that we're going to have. So members will recall that the first monitoring discussion paper relating to the Climate Emergency Strategic Plan's theme of carbon neutral development was presented to this subcommittee back in November last year, and that since then further work has been carried out between the Council's spatial planning team, the development management team and members on that specific theme of carbon neutral development. And also members will be also aware that an internal document was emailed out last week summarising the issues discussed during that further work, in which was a series of meetings and workshops relating to the implementation of the adopted local plan policies that relate to carbon neutral development and how they could be updated to help further reduce carbon emissions and to address the Council's climate emergency declaration. And as part of that document, a number of actions have been identified as well from those discussions. So the three monitoring discussion papers presented this evening focus on the other climate emergency strategic plan themes that relate to the Craven local plan and follow the same format as that first one. So sections on existing evidence, relevant local plan policies, monitoring, and a section on any changed circumstances that have occurred since adoption of the local plan. And then each paper has the same 3 discussion points, which are existing or adopted local plan policies, so how adopted policies currently support that specific theme, future policies, so how those adopted policies could be improved through review and updating of the local plan to achieve better results in terms of that theme, and requirements and limitations, so what evidence do we need to support any update policies or the creation of new policies, and what, if any, limitations are imposed by national planning policy. So they're the sort of 3 discussion points that are common to each monitoring discussion paper. So what we've done tonight is we've prepared a PowerPoint presentation which focuses on the first discussion points of how adopted local plan policies support each of these 3 themes. And a key aspect of each theme has been identified. So, for example, for the travel and transportation paper, we've got themes that cover electric vehicle charging points and bike storage, for example. And the presentation focuses on how adopted local plan policies address these. And the monitoring discussion papers themselves that have been presented to members tonight as part of the papers are slightly broader than the presentation in terms of listing other relevant policies that relate to each theme. So it's hoped that this presentation will provide a useful explanation of what adopted local plan policies do in terms of achieving the aim of each theme, before moving on to a discussion around future policies relating to each theme. So Dave Sykes from our team will present the slides relating to travel and transportation. Rachel will then present the slides for the land and nature paper, and then Roy will present the slides on carbon neutral energy and low carbon waste. And then there will be a slide relating to monitoring of the local plan in terms of these themes that Laura will present, before we then go on to have a discussion about future policy and evidence and limitations. So I will, without further ado, I'll pass on to Dave. Thanks. Sorry, I will also try and share my screen now to get the presentation up.
Yeah, you're muted, Liz.
Okay, can everybody see that? Okay, great. Right, I'll mute myself and hand over to Dave.
Thank you very much, Ruth, and good evening, everybody. If we could move on to the next slide. This shows you the overall objective of the Climate Emergency Strategic Plan with regard to travel and transportation, which is to reduce the carbon impact of travel and transport across the district by improving and promoting reduction in travel and take up of zero and low carbon transport options. The next slide then shows, and this is one of the standard slides that we're going to show you in regard to some of the key elements of what I think we called in the past the shopping list for that's developed from members and discussion between us on some of the delivery mechanisms, such as in this case electric vehicle charge points, and we produced a pyramid whereby the shopping list item is at the top of the pyramid, and what's supporting that in terms of its potential delivery are three elements. The first, which is where we're deriving the information from in these member workshops, is the Climate Emergency Strategic Plan actions. The second part of the going further down the pyramid are the Craven local plan policies that are relevant to those actions in the strategic plan. And the final layer and foundation of the pyramid relates to planning application validation requirements. So that's just a brief explanation of the standard format of the slides that we're showing you on each theme. Now, I was at this point going to transfer the screen from the slideshow to my own computer to just follow you through the Climate Emergency Strategic Plan actions, but I'm struggling. Someone might have to help me as to why I can't do that. I've got a full screen. Can anybody help me?
I think, David, maybe Ruth will have to stop screen sharing
Oh, I
to
see.
enable you to
I
put
see.
your
Okay.
slides
Well,
up.
let's not worry about that. We can deal with that in questions if members have got questions.
Okay, we can bring that up later. We can share it later, perhaps if necessary. Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, the other point as well about the 3 slides I've got are that there's quite a bit of overlap between what we've got in this theme and what we've already dealt with in the carbon neutral development workshops. So the actions here from the strategic plan are about improving the general network of across the district and plan area of charging points and requiring, where possible, new charging points in new developments. And the 2 policies that are key to achieving that in the local plan are EMV7, land and air quality, and INF4, parking provision, which we've come across before. Then below that, as far as validation requirements are concerned, we have, and we've discussed in the past, the Sustainable Design and Construction Statement, and that is soon to be supplemented by a checklist that development management have produced to encourage applicants to look at all aspects of sustainable design and construction and look at the opportunities that are available to them, and that includes reference to electric vehicle charge points. Transport assessments and statements or travel plans have been around for some time. That members are probably well used to those being accompanying planning applications where there's a significant amount of increased volume of traffic. So I won't dwell on that unless members have got questions afterwards. So on to the next slide, which is about walking and cycling to public transport. The climate emergency strategic plan actions have got a lot of overlap with some of the policies in the local plan to provide a safer environment for walking and cycling, to improve and increase areas of car-free access. Both of those clearly will envisage an environment that encourages those modes of transport without the safety issues of conflict with other transport or cars and other transport. And then the final action there from the strategic plan is the public transport improvement. This is a double objective to improve the area around the Skipton station, particularly as a transport hub. And obviously there's local plan regeneration designations and indeed work being undertaken on that project along with the wider area in Skipton town centre at the moment. And then there's also a commitment in the plan to a strategic transport improved network, working with the county council. There's 3 policies within the local plan that relate to certainly safer walking and cycling and better design of environments for those transport modes, and also excuse me, the planning application validation requirements include design and access statements, and again the transport assessments, etc. And finally, in relation to travel and transport is the next slide on cycle storage, bicycle storage. the actions there, again, very much related to improving facilities and infrastructure, albeit relatively small, to maximize the attractiveness of use of cycles, and that's in both the environmental, the climate emergency strategic plan, the local plan policies, and it will be a fundamental part of the validation requirements to show that new developments are looking at bicycle storage seriously, and along with other measures for walking and cycling. Thank you. That's my slides.
Hello everyone. I'm going to be going through the third monitoring discussion paper on land and nature. This is relating to the theme of working with partners across the district to ensure that our extensive natural resources are used in a carbon efficient way, sequestering carbon wherever possible, and with consideration for adaptation measures and biodiversity improvement. Next slide, please. And with regards to the first shopping list item, as we're calling them, it's to do with tree planting, which covers a few of the strategic plan actions regarding increased tree cover across Craven as a whole, but also increased tree cover across our own estate, and to promote the use of native species on development sites. So Craven Local Plan Policies ENV4, which is about biodiversity, and ENV5 on green infrastructure, address the need for additional planting and the protection of existing mature planting, and they also encourage the use of native species. So I've just got a little bit of detail about each of the criterion that we've listed there. So in terms of the biodiversity policy, Part A, Criterion A, Part 5, sets out that development should make a positive contribution towards achieving a net gain in biodiversity, including through the increased tree planting on developments, using appropriate planting, which means native species or locally characteristic tree and plant species where possible. But it also encourages the retention and integration of existing mature trees and healthy trees and hedgerows within the development site. Part F of ENV4, it sets out that the guiding development principles for the allocated sites that are listed at the end of this policy, which have green infrastructure on them, should be set aside, should help improve the biodiversity on site. And these allocations also stipulate, these allocations with green infrastructure also stipulate that biodiversity appraisals are required to assess the existing ecological conditions on the site, and also biodiversity mitigation plans, which aim to avoid or suitably offset negative effects of biodiversity. And then turning to the green infrastructure policy on ENV5, Criterion A states that wherever possible, development proposals will enhance existing or create new green infrastructure and secure its long-term management. So the first part of this criterion encourages tree planting on both allocated and non-allocated sites. However, it's the second part, the long-term management and maintenance element, which is often more problematic for both GI and biodiversity net gain provision. Because it's often the case that suitable schemes can be put in place, but their management can often be neglected in the longer term if funds are not allocated or if there's uncertainty over the long-term ownership of the site. The final biodiversity net gain metric from Natural England, which will be released later in the spring, is to have more detailed direction and information on the management maintenance of sites. And this will feed into the GI provision as well. And also, the North Yorkshire local planning authorities are aiming to work together in the future to help tackle this issue through the formation of a biodiversity net gain partnership, which will look at how BNG schemes can be delivered across local authority boundaries, and also how local nature recovery networks across the districts could complement each other. So that'll be a really important strand of work that we're looking to feed into as part of the wider North Yorkshire local planning authorities. And finally, the last criterion of ENV 5, Criterion D, which also sets out the same list of allocation sites that ENV 4 did at the end of its policy. It sets out that the improvement of growth to the green infrastructure network can be achieved on each site, and shows and states that the expansion of tree cover across these green infrastructure areas is useful. And it also these guiding development principles on the allocated sites, they're important in explaining where the GI should be on the site and its multi-functionality of it. And then in terms of the planning application requirements for tree planting, block plans are often required to show where existing trees and hedgerows are to be retained and where new planting will be sited. Just have the next slide, please. So this is with regards to land use for carbon neutrality. And it refers to the strategic plan action LAN 5 of diversifying land use. Now, our policy, our Craven local plan policy on EC3, on the rural economy, it has criterion A to D encourage new sustainable economic proposals, as well as the diversification and growth of existing rural and tourism related businesses, including the building of new and replacement buildings where appropriate. Now, it's more the case for a plan review with this policy, which can focus on land use innovations to help achieve carbon neutrality. So there's much potential within these criteria to require more efficient and effective use of land holdings. And this could help create a balance in environmental and carbon terms relative to the clear rural economic advantages that EMC3 rightly promotes. And with respect to validation requirements, a planning statement submitted alongside a planning application proposal for a rural economic development would set out how an applicant would effectively use the land to grow or diversify their business. So if we could use the next slide, please. So Craven is proposing to develop a green and blue infrastructure strategy. And beyond the requirements of the MPPF, it can be argued that the individual green and blue infrastructure strategies are essential for most, if not all, local authorities in England. And the main reason for this is because of modern environmental and climate changes, that spatial planning is increasingly acquiring significant environmental, ecological, and landscape dimensions. This is true, for example, the incorporation of national green infrastructure standards and the future mandatory provision of biodiversity net gain and environmental net gain within the planning system. A properly defined and established green and blue infrastructure strategy can best assist both local authorities to address these requirements in a holistic and most effective manner. The green and blue infrastructure strategy could form an important part of the evidence base with any future review of the current local plan. At a micro level, it could be used to inform planning decisions on the provision, improvement to, and also loss of open space related to proposed new development. And macro level decisions relate to the provision and establishment of green and blue space that can be multifunctional and help ensure ecosystem services. In addition, both other bodies and organisations such as parish councils will be able to use the strategy to inform their work on neighbourhood plans. For Craven, the development and provision of such a strategy has multiple spatial planning benefits. This strategy can be the most effective vehicle through which a variety of planning documents, evidence, and soon to be mandatory planning requirements can be incorporated, which can save the council much time and resources as further environmental mechanisms are required of local authorities, in particular by Natural England. It's clear that the contents of a number of documents and evidence feeding into the local plan will require reviewing and updating as time passes. And it is proposed that Craven's green and blue infrastructure strategy will bring together information from these documents in order to take a more integrated and strategic approach to the provision and management of green and blue infrastructure in the local plan area. The strategy can therefore help to identify interrelationships between the different types of green and blue spaces and the multifunctionality of those spaces. I'll hand over to Roy now for the next slide.
Thanks, Rachel. Okay, MDP4 deals with the theme of carbon neutral energy and the theme of low carbon waste together. The first, carbon neutral energy, is to ensure that the net impact of energy used by Craven District Council reaches carbon neutral, and also to support residents and partners to reduce their energy use across the district, particularly focusing on residential energy use. In terms of waste, the council wishes to ensure that the impact of our activity to collect, manage and dispose of waste is minimised, and also we wish to work with residents and partners to reduce waste across the district. Next slide, please. On these two themes, we have a little bit of overlap with our previous discussions regarding monitoring discussion paper 1 on carbon neutral development. And we have the first shopping list item of solar panels, which I think we'll have discussed before. But obviously this also relates to carbon neutral energy, as well as low carbon development. The actions supported by local plan policies and which support the provision of solar panels are set out there in the top cell of the pyramid. So renewable energy for the council in its own operations and buildings, low carbon rural development and high planning standards for energy. And the main policy and policy criteria involved in this in terms of the local plan is ENV3, the good design policy, Criterion D, which is the one that says that sustainability should be designed in and that all reasonable opportunities to generate power by solar or other means should be taken in new development. How the policy is complied with in planning applications can be demonstrated in the applicant's sustainable design and construction statement. Well, next slide, please. Heat pumps, another form of generating energy in a carbon efficient way. As with solar panels, we have the same set of climate emergency strategic plan actions being supported by the good design policy again, and also proposals in planning applications being detailed in sustainable design and construction statements. Now, the key to higher planning standards for energy, which is the action CNE 08 of the Climate Emergency Strategic Plan. The key to that is really building an evidence base to support a new policy. And that evidence base would include evidence of feasibility of the measures that we are requiring, of viability, that development costs can incorporate these measures, and also evidence that we've consulted on what we're proposing to put in policies and that people have had the opportunity to make their views known and for all points of view to be taken into account. So high planning standards can come, but they need to be done through that system of evidence building, viability testing and consultation. The next slide, please. This next pyramid deals with a slightly different matter, which is renewable energy infrastructure. So this is more substantial equipment like wind turbines, solar farms, and this sort of thing, which I'll encapsulate in the term infrastructure. We have 2 climate emergency strategic plan actions of supporting renewable energy and anaerobic digestion facilities, which use waste to generate green energy. Those actions and the provision of renewable energy infrastructure are supported by Craven Local Plan Policy MV9, which is specifically devoted to renewable and low carbon energy. And a renewable and low carbon energy project that's submitted in a planning application would be likely to be supported by a planning statement, which would explain what the scheme is and how it will contribute to reducing carbon emissions and provide renewable energy. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry. I think I went on too quickly there. Is it possible to go back? There's just one more point I'd like to say about the local plan policy ENV9, which is that whilst the policy is supportive of proposals coming forward for renewable and low carbon energy, it is perhaps a little bit negative and overly cautious in some respects, and could be perhaps more encouraging and more positive in its wording. That's something that we might want to look at when we're reviewing the local plan policies and formulating new ones in the next local plan. The essential issue is that renewable energy infrastructure does throw up concerns from some quarters about landscape impact, for example. And that is something that will be an interesting discussion given the Council's climate emergency declaration and the additional urgency which this issue now has. And it may be that the debate about landscape impact versus renewable energy would need to be reopened. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. I'm just doing a quick slide on monitoring of the local plan and the climate emergency strategic plan. So as we've been working on these monitoring discussion papers, we have noticed there's quite a few gaps in the indicators that we currently use in the Council's Authority Monitoring Report, which relate to climate change. So I met with Rob Atkins to discuss how the climate emergency strategic plan will be monitored and what indicators they will be using. And he said that they have had an initial list of indicators agreed, but that haven't been reported on yet, and they're likely to need refining. So we agreed with Rob that it would be logical for us to incorporate the reporting of the climate emergency strategic plan into the Authority Monitoring Report. And the special planning team are going to work with Rob and will refine the indicators from the climate emergency strategic plan, which relate to planning, and work up some new indicators to develop a more robust set of indicators relating to planning and climate change. And then the spatial planning team are going to be responsible for monitoring all of that going forwards. So Rob and his team will monitor the non-planning indicators, and they'll send them to us, and everything will be published together in the Authority Monitoring Report. So the complete set will be published in the AMR for 2020-2021. It might be that we can't have results against every indicator at this stage, but if we have a list of indicators, we can start to put in place the systems that we need to gather the necessary information and then publish results against those going forwards and start to have a better idea of how things are changing and how the policies are working. And that is it for our presentation. So I think we're just going to stop sharing the screen now, and if we go back to Councillor Staveley, and you can start the discussion, please, and we can answer any questions that members might have on any of those points we've raised.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Yeah, just before I stop sharing, the last slide really was just sort of reiterating what Laura was saying there, that hopefully you found that presentation useful in terms of what existing adopted local plan policies currently do to help to achieve those three themes of the climate emergency strategic plan, and how they can be implemented to achieve, you know, the best results we can now with the policies that we've got, and then hopefully that will help then in the discussion going forward in terms of, you know, how future policies might need to be improved and updated, which you know has been alluded to in the presentation, and also what sort of evidence-based requirements are needed, which again, you know, we've touched on that in terms of the land and nature monitoring discussion paper, which in terms of us preparing a blue and green infrastructure strategy, and so part of that, the work to produce new evidence has started in terms of that theme. So if I can pass back now to the chair, and I'll stop sharing this screen, and we can start the discussion hopefully. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Ruth. Apologies to everybody for my arriving slightly late. I'm going to say traffic. Maybe not. Right. Yeah, members. Interesting presentation. I can't see anybody indicated to speak, so I might as well dive in there with both feet. Yes, charging points. Totemic nonsense if we're not careful. Our pyramid could turn into one of those pyramids of piffle, inverted or otherwise, if we get this wrong. I'm airing a note of caution on that. I think if we're going to look at a policy, it needs to address the reality of the consumer use. We're talking about putting charging points into houses. I think the best that we could realistically hope to do is to actually insist on the specification of the house's electrical system to be able to support a charging system for a vehicle. The reason for why I say that is because there's so many different versions. So you can't just sort of prescriptively say you've got to have a charging point in your house for a car if it won't fit the car that you've got, assuming you've even got one, because clearly that's just a waste of resource. So far as the on-street charging infrastructure goes, again, I'm deeply uncomfortable with this. The reason you or I will fill our car up at a petrol station is probably because we can't do it cheaper at home. It isn't an option. When it comes to charging electric vehicles, you can quite clearly charge them at home, assuming that you've done your homework and you've actually sort of got the ability to charge your own car. In which case, you will do it there where it's cheaper. The commercial charging points in the street are substantially more expensive. And I've just this horrible feeling if we go charging forward, saying we need to have this charging infrastructure network in there, we will find that we underwrite an awful lot of private sector charging points, which never wipe their face financially and don't actually offer a real support, should we say, for our residents. If we're going to do anything, we need to look at how we meet the challenges, particularly in our urban conurbations where air quality is an issue, of actually facilitating the charging of vehicles on a, dare I say, terrace street, for example. People can't have extension cables running out the front doors everywhere to charge up the cars. So charging points, a difficult one, but it is something that clearly we have to address, how we address it. So those are my thoughts on that issue. With regards to the tree planting issue, we talk about ENV5, about managing trees. I mean, I have to say, as a ward councillor, I get as much grief about unmanaged trees, particularly owned by Craven District Council, I have to say, as I do about anything. It is an issue. a developer puts a scheme together, puts all these nice looking little trees on the development, and 10 years later, these things have grown beyond control. And as you say, as was noted in the presentation, if that hasn't got some sort of management plan, it then creates a problem for all the residents and affects their quality of life. We then get people complaining about right to light, etc. And rather than embracing and valuing the foliage that we're putting onto these developments, people start to resent it quite badly. So once again, I think there has to be a note of caution in that. I would just ask, why are we looking for necessarily native trees rather than, should I say, would the term sympathetic be a better option? I think there are types of trees that we could bring into this country that they use in other countries, and this comes from somebody in the field, should we say, who I was talking to about this issue, which possibly would suit the urban environment better and cause less problems in terms of the management requirements for that sort of tree, and still provide a greater biodiversity. But I think that's rant over for now from the chairman. So I'll, I don't know if you want to answer that now, or would you like to take another question from one of the other councillors and then come back to say we've got Councillor Brockbank who's wanting to speak from the Orangery.
Yeah, if we perhaps take Councillor Brockbank's comments.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got, as usual, I've got quite a few. I've got some questions. Following on from the electric charging points, do we have a plan for where we need to put electric charging points? Will that be down to Craven District Council, or is it down to North Yorkshire County Council? You know, we don't just want to be putting these anywhere haphazardly. We've got to think about people's journeys. So is there a plan, and who's responsible for the plan? And then currently fuel prices, as I understand it, are regulated nationally, with some garages are allowed, like in Hawes, I think they're allowed to charge a bit more because they're very rural, but fuel prices are regulated. Will prices for electricity charging points be regulated, you know, the cost of the electricity, or if they're privately owned, can they charge whatever they like? That's another thing. Going back to, there's a lot of references on public transport, which, as we know, is North Yorkshire County Council. Have we had sight of of their plans for the public transport for Craven? And do we have any way of influencing that? It's one thing us saying what we want, but actually public transport has nothing to do with us. So how are we going to influence that public transport provision with North Yorkshire County Council? And have North Yorkshire County Council been invited to consult on with us on that? I'm all for using public transport, but obviously, you know, with the things that I am aware of, people with mobility issues and sight problems using public transport. If you have a mobility problem, and you don't have to be registered disabled as you get older, she says from experience, as you get older, your balance isn't as good. You know, you might have a bit of arthritis in your hands and you can't hold on to things. You might have you might have arthritis in your ankles, and while a bus is moving, getting up to get off a bus is very, very difficult. So, and I hear, you know, I hear a lot about cycling, and that's fine for people who can cycle, but not everybody is fit enough to cycle. And we've got to think about those people who have mobility issues, who have sight issues, who have confidence issues, and they might not be confident using public transport. And we're putting a lot of, quite rightly, but we're putting a lot of reliance upon public transport. And I think public transport needs to change. Public transport needs to be geared more to the customer rather than to the provider. Wheelchair users, for example. Land nature was the next one, I think, was the green infrastructure. What about trees? Awful lot about trees. But we don't want to be just planting trees. What about ponds and rough areas for wildlife? It's not all about trees. Land diversity. When are we going? Oh, land diversity. Okay, I'd like to know a bit more about land diversity. I didn't really understand. That's not because it was presented wrongly. It was me. I need a bit more about that to understand it better. My final question is, when are we going to start implementing all of these actions that we've talked about in the planning system? That's it, thank you.
Okay, perhaps if I can come back on some of those questions first before we move on, is that okay, Chair?
Yeah, that's fine, Ruth. Quite a bit to
well, I think in terms of the last question about when we're going to start implementing these actions, well, so the purpose of the discussion tonight, well, one aspect of the discussion tonight is to link the climate emergency strategic plan theme, and then below that, each theme, there are a number of actions that we've talked about. That's the sort of top of the pyramid, each pyramid. And then what we've tried to show in the presentation is how the local plan policies help to achieve those actions and achieve that overall theme. So by implementing those adopted plan policies that we've talked about, that's the way of that the local plan can. I mean, there's other. It's not just the local plan's job to achieve that overall theme and the actions, but it's one way the local plan can help to achieve those. So that's what we're talking about, really. That the policies we're talking about and the different criteria of the policies are the specifics of how those actions can be achieved in terms of the local plan. The question you had about land and nature, and I mean the action about trees, it comes from the climate emergency strategic plan. But obviously, and the local plan's response to that is about our policy that we've got on biodiversity and green infrastructure. And for example, on all our allocated sites, or most of our allocated sites, we identify areas of green infrastructure to be provided, and that's a requirement for any developer that's putting forward a proposal on those sites. And you know, Rachel talked about the multifunctional. So an area of green infrastructure can provide, you know, an open space that is nice to walk around or sit in, but also it can provide trees, it can provide ponds, it can provide, you know, hedgerows, a wide range of different habitats that then it supports biodiversity and helps improve biodiversity on a site. So so that's sort of how how the plan deals with that. It's not, you know, the plan doesn't just require trees to be planted. That's specifically one of the actions from the climate emergency strategic plan, and the local plan policies on biodiversity and green infrastructure helps to achieve that, but also it's wider than that, and it helps to achieve wider biodiversity and multifunctional areas that would be green infrastructure areas. The public transport issue, well, you know, yeah, it is North Yorkshire County Council's role to provide the public transport, and they have a transport plan which we've, you know, in preparing the local plan, we have looked at, and we've had meetings with North Yorkshire about that, and and vice versa, they've had input into our plan as well. So, you know, the policies that we have in our plan that relate to transport and, you know, sustainable transport on highways, for example, INF 7, you know, that includes sections on or requirements to try and incorporate and link to the North Yorkshire County Council's plans on public transport. And I suppose, you know, in terms of like the point about people with mobility issues and people who might not be able to cycle, I suppose the aim of the plan really is to achieve sustainable development. So that's sort of in terms of where it's located in the best places, but also that it's located in a way that's accessible by a range of transport modes. So walking, cycling, public transport. And obviously here in Craven, we always will have a reliance on the private car because of the rural nature of Craven. So it aims to encourage and require all developments to have links to a wide range of different transport modes. The electric vehicle charging points, I mean, in terms of sort of, I think you were referring to on-street sort of points and where do we have a plan of where we need to put them. That's not something the local plan would do. That's the local plan encourages the increased use of low emission vehicles and the provision of electric vehicle charging points. So if a development, you know, if a development is proposed, then the provision of electric vehicle charging points are encouraged. That's how the wording is currently in the local plan. I am aware that development management do use a condition where appropriate as well that relate to electric vehicle charging points. And I don't know if Neville wants to say any more on that. He's here tonight, so whether he wants to say any more on that.
If I can just come back on that point, Ruth, yes, we do. We are now using conditions. We used to do it as an informative. We're now using it as a condition to actually require the provision of charging points as part of a planning condition. I have some reservations about the enforceability of that, given paragraph 55 of the NPPF and the conditions, but yes, we're doing it. So, you know, we've moved from informatives to conditions, and we will secure delivery wherever we can do.
If I may, Ruth, I'm deeply uncomfortable with that as a policy, I have to say. For the reasons I gave, you know, there's too wide a range of options out there for charging points. If we insist on the infrastructure being in, you know, on the site in the domestic dwellings to put a suitable charging point of the householder's choice, that's fine. But for us to say you've got to put a charging point in, it seems a very strange thing to say. It's almost, I'm trying to think of a suitable example. It's almost like us saying that you've got to put broadband into all new houses, but it can only be BT broadband. It can't be anything else. You know, that's the sort of way that it comes across. An individual householder will buy a house and make their choice as to what type of vehicle they want, what type of charging point they require. So we then end up in a situation where a developer may use this point to unpick that policy, which would come back to Neville's point that he feels a bit uncomfortable in terms of how enforceable it is. I think if we come up with sensible proposals, we get somewhere. If we come up with totemic, I'll say it, totemic nonsense, a developer will just use it as a good excuse to just scratch it straight off the list, save themselves some money. But anyway, Neville, if you want to.
I think the point, David, if I can come back on that, is that we are encouraging people by conditions on planning permissions in accordance with the NPPF to actually deliver of electric charging points on site, there is a right of challenge against that, and that's what I don't want to undermine the local plan position on, because I wouldn't want to undermine the position when there is a right of challenge by the applicant. I'm not suggesting that we would get to a point of saying that a commercial developer would have to put, you know, we get a new application for a supermarket. Rest assured, I'm not telling you there's another one on the cards, but if we got an application for a new supermarket, would we want electric charging points sprayed all over the car park? Morrison's in Skipton have put electric charging points on their site. That's their choice. That's something that we would want to encourage, but I can't actually force them by condition of a planning permission. It's something that we need to continue to work out. And there's nothing wrong with having, you know, what's wrong with saying that you end up with an electric charging point as part of a development? If there is any challenge, there is a right to appeal, and I wouldn't want that to undermine the policy position. And that's the policy position that we need to make sure that we've got right.
I think the point is the nuance to the technology. We need to recognise that before formulating a policy. Would that make it more straightforward?
Yeah, that would. No, I go along with that entirely, David. Yeah, we'll go along with that. Well,
right, thank you.
I can certainly sign up to that.
I think David Smurthwaite's either trying to swap flies or he was trying to attract my attention. I'm not sure. His hands virtually up.
No flies on me.
All right, that'll do.
He said. Now, I think we're talking about two very different things here. I think what you're talking about, David, is about the actual plug that goes into the particular car and things. And it is, I think what we're proposing is actually very similar to broadband. So it's about you getting the right size of cable, you're getting the ducting, and it's there for whatever the end use is. So it's not about, what we're trying to avoid is having a extension cable coming out to the downstairs bathroom to get to your car. It's about having the right size of cable in the right, so you can put your appropriate socket from your car to that. So it's not prescribing in that. And I think there's all sorts of things raised, but just on EV points, I think the other things Ruth's right. This is about enabling and supporting the development. It's not about prescribing where they'll go, but clearly you need EV points which are not just at the home. If we're encouraging visitors to come to the area, they'll want to use a public one or private one. So there's lots of instances when we'll need it, but also it's not just EV, it's also things like hydrogen. We need to start about that, how we start looking at hydrogen, both for HGVs and cars as well. There's going to be all sorts of infrastructure which we're going to have to accommodate in the coming years. So it's, yes, but it's about putting that infrastructure, it's about allowing the infrastructure, it's not necessarily prescribing. I think in terms of, say, supporting tourists, then that's more about what I suppose my other team and Rob Atkins is doing along with the National Park for their planning service, about identifying where the best sites would be. It's not necessarily for the local plan to do that.
I think you probably brought on another point there, which sort of reinforces the point I'm making. It needs to be evidence driven, rather than just saying we think we need it, so we'll put lots of charging points in or whatever. And the commercial sector invariably will, to a great degree, drive that. So, as you say, if a hydrogen fuel cell, it will be probably fuel stations that will be the driver. But we may need to be aware of that technology moving on and the requirement to encourage that sort of facility in the district. Ruth, is there anything else you want to come back to? Because Councillor Pringle's been waiting very patiently, which is quite uncanny of him. But he will be next if you haven't got anything else to say.
If I can, just to say, so our current policy, our adopted policy, it has that, you know, encourages the provision of electric vehicle charging points. So that's something that, you know, it's not a requirement, it's encouraged, but and that's something that DM are then using the condition on that basis. Now, Andrea's just put something in the chat, which has just reminded me that, that the government has recently done some consultation on changes to building regulations, which, if that was finalised in that state, then that would require all new developments to provide infrastructure for electric vehicle and electric vehicle charging points. So that's a possible change that's coming. So in terms of you know, we know what the situation is in terms of the current policy and the adopted policy. You know, the question is, I suppose, how could it be updated, and how would members want it to be updated to perhaps have a bit more certainty, or and then, like you say, it needs to be backed up by the appropriate evidence. And there's a lot of evidence needed about, you know, the actual feasibility of all this, and the different sort of technologies that there are, which are changing all the time in this field. So just wanted to say that.
Right, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Pringle, if you'd like to come in and unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, this is an impossible subject because we can't even agree between ourselves on something as simple as charging points, and I accept that because it is an impossible subject. But I want to say something really positive, because I've sat in 4 or 5 spatial planning committee meetings and listened to a lot of talk and scratched my head and wondered where we were going. And Linda Popbanks just sort of said the words, when are we going to start implementing what we're talking about? And that's what I'm thinking. Now, the one thing on a positive note is that tonight we have members of our development control here for the first time, and that is a massive step forward. So thank you to those members of development control, because there's no point spatial planning officers sitting with spatial planning members and talking about anything unless development control is involved. So thank you for being here. But this brings Ruth's pyramid into question, because Ruth's pyramid said basically what current policies allow and how we're going to do it. And if you all remember back to the bottom box of the pyramid, it was about validation. And at the validation stage, somebody's going to check the transport report and make sure it has or hasn't got electric charging points in it. Now, I've watched this planning department for 4 years, and it's pretty clear to me that whoever validates a planning application in development control doesn't read various documents. What they do is they say, oh, there's a transport assessment here.
Councillor Pringle, just let's be a little bit careful about how we talk about the performance of individual officers. We just need to keep this on the subject matter. So you might suggest it, but we can't accuse it. If you understand what I'm saying, please carry on. I understand what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying, but we've sort of made a promise tonight. One of our officers said in future at the validation stage, and it's in all the documents, and the officer tonight said it'll be sort of checked at the validation stage whether the developer is doing things that will meet our climate change. And my question is really simple. Is our validation stage just a simple rubber stamp, or is somebody who understands planning actually going to read the documents and say, yes, this developer is providing charging points and we like that?
Right. I think just for the purpose of clarification, you seem to have let this genie out of the bottle a little bit. But I'm quite sure I know what the answer will be. But nonetheless, Neville, would you like to confirm the situation in terms of the validation process, just for members' clarity?
David, just for members' clarity, the purpose of the validation procedure is designed either nationally or locally. We've got a national validation process that we have to comply with. We've got a local validation process that has to be complied with. Ultimately, the content of it is down to the development management case officer to actually, so that there's a certain tick box that needs to be done. Does it have a red edge on it? Does it have the application forms being signed? Has the fee been paid? Everything else. Do we have all sorts of other validation criteria that we have to do? I cannot expect my planning support team to actually go through the whole process of the content of the transport assessment, the landscape impact assessment, the drainage assessment, the SUDS assessment, everything else. That becomes a certain tick box at the beginning. But once the tick box is started, that's when the professional officers step in and assess the content of the quality of the information that is provided. And that's where we go from there on in. And, you know, there's no way that we end up with the validation criteria, which is set out on the website, end of story. And once we've got the validation criteria in place, we then click the box and we start and roll it. It's then down to the professional officers, the case officers, to assess the content of that and decide whether or not that is complete, requires additional information, requires all sorts of things. So it's not simply a case of throwing it out. We have a very, very clear validation process, nationally and locally, and that's on the website. And the staff do their very professional job in assessing the content of it, the tick boxes. The content of it becomes then the professional assessment, and that's where we go from there on in.
So in layman's terms, the validation process really, should we say, assesses that all the chapters are there, but the professional officer actually reads the book.
I couldn't have put it any other better way, David. That's it. Yeah.
Thank you.
You've got the content of the Bible. The assessment of the intonation in the Bible is down to the professional officers.
Excellent. Councillor Pringle, you will be able to sleep better tonight for knowing that's the case. Right. So, if we, I know I've got David Smurthwaite once again with his hand in the air, virtually speaking, on Chatterbox. So, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
I was only going to come back about trees, but if there's a...
If you must, go on.
But unless Brian and Linda are talking about the similar subject. Well, I'm happy to talk about trees till the cows come home. I think there's a few things which were raised about trees and tree planting. I think one is about on the larger landscape scale of things. Craven currently, as you probably know, has some of the lowest levels of tree coverage in the whole country. It's about 5%. And I think also with loss of subsidies or the transition away from subsidies to whatever, it is likely that farmers will be encouraged to plant more trees. And as a means to get income, but also looking at diversification of businesses. So I think certainly for something now and in the future is really thinking about how do we allow farmers to generate different sources of income from what they're planting. And so whether it is from timber or whether it's for, I don't know, could be hunting, it could be leisure pursuits, it could be glamping. There could be all sorts of things which I think we probably need to think about and have a good idea about what we mean in the future. And I think in terms of urban trees, yes, some people get upset, but many more people get upset when they're actually cut down. As we've seen in Skipton recently and Sheffield as you're well aware of. Urban trees, they add value to houses. They cut the speed of cars. And I'm not meaning just cars crashing into them. So it's the benefits of urban trees are numerous and something which to be encouraged, I think. I know in some places like Hull, they've got a policy in their local plan which says that every house with a garden has to have 2 trees in that garden. And if they don't have 2 trees, they've got to pay £50 to put the trees elsewhere. There's all sorts of different ways of doing it, but the idea of having greater biodiversity within town centres, creating more shade because of the heat and global warming, all sorts of benefits which we've haven't been that successful with in terms of working with the county and highways about getting trees by our roads. So no, I think we should try and look at it positively if possible.
Right, well, you're the one who's obviously not raking the leaves up. Anyway, Councillor Shuttleworth, if you'd like to come in now, please. And then we'll have Councillor Brockbank and then Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this isn't a criticism, it's an observation about a very recent event that David has just mentioned that's happened in Skipton. And I think it relates to a lack of what shall we say, cooperation between the planning authority and the highway authority. Now, all that may be eliminated following reorganisation if and when it occurs, but and then it will be interdepartmental consultation. We've recently had a case for quite a major development in town. I think most members present will know about that, where there's quite a bit of tree planting and green spaces provided. But then to meet what as I understand it, highways requirements, a lovely avenue of mature trees has just been hacked down. Now, you know, you've obviously got a conflict there, and because they were mature trees, they would be quite, how shall we say, more efficient than a lot of small saplings and whips planted, in addition to the visual impact on the environment. And I think that's something that needs to be certainly mentioned, that other aspects of development, there must be some effective discussion and agreement. So we certainly, overall, we don't lose the benefit of green infrastructure.
Well, thank you, Councillor Shuttleworth. Councillor Brockbank, Councillor Myers, and Liz Ruth, are you wanting to come back on that point particularly, or are you happy waiting?
Well, I was going to just reiterate, you know, that in terms of what we've said about ENV4 and ENV5 on biodiversity and green infrastructure, that's what the plan is, encourages, requires, you know, these areas of green infrastructure and tree planting to be provided on new development sites, and you know, that's a key aim of the local plan.
Thank you. Neville, are you wanting to come on in on that point as well, or?
Come back on that, Chairman.
Yeah.
The issue over trees in highway verges and in the control of the responsible authority, the usual position that's taken is that responsible authorities, be that the highway authority, the highways agency, or indeed any other highway authority or local council, would act responsibly in removing trees in the highway verge. And what I think has happened, as Brian has referred to, I'm assuming he's talking about the trees on Howe Bank and on the entrance into Skipton, was something that was not expected. But the general position would be that we would not normally invoke and impose a tree preservation order on land that is involved in the highway, because there is the responsible authority, the highway authority, the highways agency, or whatever. And it's unfortunate, but I've taken that on board and we are attempting to resolve it. But the loss of trees in the highway verge is something that I've got no control over, because it's controlled by the county councils, the highway authority.
Right, thank you, Neville. Councillor Shuttleworth, you want to just come back on that, or is it another point? Right, Councillor Myers, Councillor Brockbank, if we could beg your indulgence a moment while Councillor Shuttleworth makes his.
Yeah, I appreciate what Neville said, but surely that is something which does need resolving prior to any issue, that there is some consultation between the Highway Authority and the Planning Authority to ensure that we're not having a negative impact on the green infrastructure overall.
I'm just wondering where this leads from spatial planning point of view, really. But
Chairman, can I take this up
yeah.
with Brian separately, because I don't think it's something that now needs to be discussed in the Spatial Planning Committee. I think it's a matter that I need to talk to Brian about, and rest assured I will do that tomorrow, Brian.
We do seem to be straying, so I'll go on to Councillor Brockbank and then Councillor Myers.
Thank you. Just out of politeness, I've already spoken, but Councillor Myers hasn't spoken yet. So if he's happy that mine's just a quickie really. Thank you. It's about the reference to validation, and Neville said that the validation is quite specific. What is considered under validation. So, oh, Andrew's written something. So should we be changing that reference to validation, where we're saying this should be done under validation? Should we change that to some more suitable words that perhaps Neville might be best to come up with, like during the early planning stages or whatever? Because I think by saying validation, if we have it in our policy that all these things have got to be resolved during validation, so that's before it gets passed on to the case officer, then it could hold things up quite a bit. But I'd like to hear from Neville, really, if I can.
I think that's something that is under review. We've got certain validation criteria that we have to comply with. We've got local validation criteria that we are obliged to follow. If there are any shortfalls or anything that will hold it up, I would certainly want to review that position, because what I don't want to do is hold up applications by saying that they're invalid for reason X, Y, or Z. And if that is slowing down the process, that is something I do not want to do, because I'm committed to actually delivering as fast as I possibly can and not holding stuff up. Because if we end up, well, if it is an invalid application, it doesn't get registered, and therefore the clock doesn't start and tick. But on the other hand, that just frustrates developers, it frustrates applicants, and that's something that, needs to be reviewed, and I'll look at that, but that's not the way we're working at the moment. An invalid application is an invalid application and won't be registered until such time as it is valid. If there is a need to review that validation process, we've gone through a long process on that, but I'm prepared to review it.
Right, thank you. Councillor Myers, I'm sure this has been worth waiting for.
Do you know, it hasn't really. I was going to witter on about trees, and decided David wittered on about trees enough, and I'm not going to take up people's time by wittering on about. Yeah, and then I was also going to make the nice of Neville to refer to the Highways Authority, the responsible authority. I think we may all beg to differ on that. There's nothing much about them. Surely if it was going to involve taking down trees, they should have said that in their response to the planning applications, and the planning committee may have come to a different decision. So there you go. Anyway, thank God I don't do that.
Right. Right, after various members of the planning committee have tried hijacking our spatial planning meeting, has anybody else got any points they wish to make? I'm seeing a lack of hands there. So are we happy with what we've seen tonight at this stage? Right, there's some thumbs up. We're getting somewhere. David, your hand is virtually up.
Sorry, I was just going to ask a question. I think it was Roy asked the question and no members answered it about the importance of the energy infrastructure, aka wind turbines, anaerobic digesters. We've always had difficulties with these as a whole council in terms of wind turbines, but also anaerobic digesters on farmers' land. I don't think we've ever been supportive. Is there, I suppose, collectively, is there any issues which we should be thinking about, or is it important for us to be doing it, or should we find the alternative ways? Just to, I don't want to lose the point raised by Roy.
No, thank you. Booth?
Sorry.
Did you catch that?
Yes, I did catch that. Yeah. Well, I mean, I suppose it's an important issue that was raised by Roy, really, about the it'd be good to get a feel from members tonight whether they feel it's important for any updated plan to continue or increase the sort of encouragement of energy infrastructure, for example, wind turbines. And then it's sort of marrying that up with objections we have to that in terms of like impact on the landscape. So it would be useful to get members' views really on how if any they would like you'd like to see the local plan updated in that respect.
Councillor Myers next, then I'll come in after you.
Yeah, I'm grateful, Chairman, because really that's why I stuck my hand up. But we got sidetracked by trees and yes, I mean, I think it's very interesting. I have to hold my hand up and say that I was wrong a number of years ago in opposing some wind turbines in Craven. At the time, I thought it was absolutely the right thing to do for amenity and landscape reasons. And I think that our knowledge of the climate change emergency has moved on considerably. I mean, I'm talking 10 years ago, I think so. So I might view it very differently today. But what I would say is sometimes there's an economic benefit to farmers and landowners in doing some of these schemes, and they aren't necessarily of the biggest environmental benefit, and sometimes they're in completely the wrong places, and so there's not a sort of one fit policy for it. Farms that are too small and want to put in an anaerobic digester simply going to create traffic movement on bad roads and drive motorists and villagers mad. And that happens anyway, mega dairies, things like that. So let's not be adding to any of that. Let's be realistic. And I think business cases need to be looked at by people who understand with respect how farms work. And something that involves hundreds of vehicle movements a day is not sustainable. It's not environmentally sustainable. So, let's encourage it, but in the right places. And I think that goes for all of it. We need to do this, but not just to make some farmers rich. The wrong places cause nightmares for other residents and road users.
Right. I also myself, I'm the idea of small scale wind turbines in the right setting certainly does appeal. I mean, clearly, as Councillor Myers has said, there's quite a provocative nature to the big commercial wind turbines. But there's no reason. I mean, having my own experience of travelling down into Norfolk last year, I was pleasantly surprised at how many as I say, relatively small scale wind turbine setups that were on farms and so on, you know, clearly near buildings that were using the electricity generated. So I must admit, I feel a bit more at ease with that, because, as I say, the impact on the visual impact on the environment is less, and it's the sort of thing that is possibly more sustainable for individual developments as they come along. So certainly, I'm quite at ease with that idea. I don't know what other members think of that. I've got Councillor Pringle next, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, Ruth and Roy have asked a very sensible question. There's no doubt about it. Turbines, wind turbines are ugly, anaerobic digesters are ugly, but we have declared a climate emergency, and we've come up with nothing that's going to get us from where we are to where we want to be. So we do have to relax the way we look at them. And Councillor Myers is right, as always. Of course, we will judge every case on its merits. I think I know the particular one he's talking about. But we have to take a different view to what we would have taken 10 years ago. Because if we don't, we're never going to get anywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pringle. Not least because we didn't mention a planning application for change. Hey, right. So we've got Ruth next, please.
Yeah, just to come back on. I mean, in terms of the small scale wind turbines, our policy ENV, the plans policy ENV9, it does support them, providing they meet various criteria. And one of them is it's directly related to and generates power for the operation or for that specific farmstead or other rural business, or a local settlement, or the site is identified as being suitable for development of wind turbines in a neighbourhood plan. So they're the criteria. And I think the point that Councillor Pringle made in terms of now the council declared the climate emergency declaration, and things have moved on a lot over the last 10 years. Then I think that relates to the local plan as well. That when the local plan was adopted in November 2019, we didn't have the climate change emergency declaration, and it's particularly since the pandemic, I think the climate emergency and climate change has become higher up on the sort of agenda. And obviously, when you prepare a plan and you adopt a plan, that's dealing with issues that are identified at a certain point in time, and then all the evidence is compiled around those issues and to prepare a plan that contains specific policies. And that's why, there's a need to have that ongoing review of the plan, and after 5 years have that updating of the plan so that it can evolve and deal with new issues that are identified. And obviously, with the fact that the council has declared the climate emergency declaration, and it is a key issue that then we can, and climate emergency is higher up on the agenda, then that's something that this update to the plan needs to look at. But I suppose the idea of these monitoring discussion papers that we've looked at so far, is flagging up what the plan currently does, and then trying to get that discussion going and that feedback from you all as members as to how that plan can be updated in terms of these themes, and but to recognise that the plan does contribute to achieving these themes is not as much as it could do, because obviously it could always do more, and that the idea of these meetings really is to try and tweak out those ideas that we can then look at and go away and identify what evidence will be required, or and to sort of it to be a continual sort of monitoring and review process. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Myers.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. I mean, absolutely, we can't reset history, can we? The nature of these things are evolving. I think what we can do, and hopefully through looking at the current plan and what is in it that helps support the council declaration of emergency, that officers will have at the forefront of their mind, developers will have at the that we want our policies interpreting in the light of our declaration of climate change emergency. And to the extent that they're flexible, to the extent that they are wide-ranging, officers will not disappoint members by interpreting them in the light of our declaration. And if they are challenged, so be it. I'm not saying officers should behave irresponsibly, of course, but it is of pressing importance we address matters to the extent that we can through. I mean, there are other issues, as we all know, that in fact the biggest problem is not the new houses, the old houses, and how we mitigate that. But we must do what we can and use the current local plan, you know, in the best way we can in the light of that. So, but it's good to have officers all on the same page, and hopefully members too. So that's great.
Thank you, Councillor Myers. I'm not sure if you're advocating knocking down houses that are less than, over 20 years old there, but anyway, that'd be an interesting policy.
Can I knock down my one? Actual build one of those super efficient ones with lots of natural light. I think they wouldn't let me. It took 2 years to get a window put in a barn, so probably not.
Roll the dice, you never know. Right, Ruth, have we got anything further to go now? Are we satisfied that we've wrung the members dry of their opinions on what you need to move forward?
Yeah, I think we've got something to go out there really, and we can take away and look at you know, what's been discussed tonight, and come away with some sort of ideas for perhaps how the local plan, certain policies in the local plan might need updating and reviewing. So we can certainly, you know, go away and have a look at that. Yeah.
Right, thank you very much indeed. So I don't believe we've got any other items at this moment, having brought item 4 to a close, item 5. Next, so date of the next meeting. Ruth, when would you like to next see our picturesque looking faces?
Yeah, well, obviously we'll be this is the end of we've had 4 monitoring discussion papers that relate specifically to the climate emergency strategic plan, but you know, as we're ongoing with the monitoring and review of the plan, then we will produce further monitoring discussion papers that relate to the different aspects of the local plan. So we'll do that, and we'll bring in the next one back to Craven Spatial. But I'm not sure. We need to think about really what we're going to focus on next, and the timetable for doing that. But in terms of other work that the spatial planning team are working on at the moment, we're preparing a number of supplementary planning documents, SPDs, and 2 are what we're doing is progressing 2 of them, the good design one and the rural workers dwelling SPD. And we will propose to bring a draft of that to Craven Spatial to seek approval to carry out some public consultation on those 2 documents. So whereas we haven't got a definite date for the next meeting, but I will be looking to organise a meeting some point in June on those 2.
Excellent, that sounds good. Well, then I'm sure nobody will be going on holiday or anything like that, will they? So how's the thought? I don't know. Right, so that will call tonight's meeting to a close, and thank you all for your attendance and your input.